has been called all of us to sit in front of a microphone and, if I can be so bold, edify the saints. That's really what we do. We're not about tickling your ears. We're not about entertainment. Yep, sports, weather, and traffic are all important, but you know what? We're about transmitting truths that can radically redirect somebody's eternity. We're about winning the lost and equipping the saints. And part of the work that we have to do, as we're called to sit in front of our microphones, is to really push back bad doctrine. Every single time I do a program on Israel on my show, I will always get, well, nasty is the best word I can think of, email from people who say, listen, there is no more Israel. The Jews have all dissipated. There are no true Jews anymore. They've turned their back on God, so therefore God is judging Israel. To which I would say, what, you think America's doing real good in that area, do you? I mean, I'd be careful about using that standard against Israel. But I do not believe between Malachi and Matthew God changed his mind. And for whatever reason, God could have chosen the Celts, the Picts, the Normans, the Saxons. He chose the Jews to bring salvation to the world. When we get to heaven, we can ask him why he didn't pick another people group. But for now, his great plan of salvation was brought to us through the Jewish people. Like it or not, they will always have a very special spot in the heart of our great God because he used them to bring his plan of salvation to the rest of the world. So naturally, there's going to be animus constantly meted out against the Jewish people. By the way, globally, anti-Semitism is at an all-time high. One would have thought with Hitler that would have been a nasty, repulsive era that would have come and gone, and we all would be smarter as a result of it. But in fact, we're seeing anti-Semitism at higher rates than we've ever seen it before. I think, again, for us as believers who look at the world through markedly different glasses, we have to be able to see that this isn't a UN problem, this isn't a State Department problem, this isn't even an Assad or an Iranian problem. This is a spiritual problem manifesting itself in some practical ways here on planet Earth. But we need to be, exactly as the Bible says, praying for the peace of Jerusalem, and that knowing that he is not willing that any should perish, his people would come to know Yeshua as the Messiah.
You know, it's amazing to me, again, talking with Carolyn Glick last week, that she talked about the Israeli economy is booming. In a world that we hear stories coming out of Europe and certainly our own economy in this country, what's going on here. But she was talking about I guess the natural gas has started to flow in from those offshore fields, and that there are countries starting to line up already to purchase oil and gas from Israel. That would have been unheard of even to think about it a few years ago, but it is an indication of God's, I believe, sovereign hand looking after that tiny, tiny little nation that is so special to him.
Absolutely. And am I glad you brought this up? Craig and I have traveled an awful lot throughout the Middle East, and I will never forget when we traveled out of Israel past the checkpoint into Egypt. Now, that was an interesting experience, nothing like traveling in a car with people with AK-47s, right? Every checkpoint, we were introduced to another aspect of Egyptian life. But as we traveled out of Israel into Egypt, we were so impressed with the Sinai and what had happened in the transference of that land. Because Israel, remember, in order to maintain peace with Israel desires peace. Despite what the BBC says and NPR says, it's imperative our friends understand that Israel desires peace. And I can share a quick story on that in a minute, but let me go back to out of Israel through Egypt. As we're traveling through the Sinai, it's like going through the fields of Texas. There are all these oil pumps going back and forth, pulling oil out of that part of the world. And when Israel decided that she wanted to broker peace with Egypt, she gave up those mineral rights. We're talking multiple millions of dollars. And yet, in order to maintain a peaceful relationship with Egypt, they were willing to give up those mineral rights. And I was just immensely impressed with that as I watched all these oil pumps thinking Israel could have been bringing in all that revenue, and they didn't. But, as you say, God has blessed them. What's interesting is when you get away from some of the tourist spots in Israel, you realize that Israel is not unlike the Silicon Valley in California. There are more cell phones in Israel, I think, in any other country I've ever been to. In fact, every time there's a terrorist bomb, one of the first things you hear are the sound of a gazillion cell phones going off, because they always know it's going to be a first blast, the sound of cell phones, and then a second blast. That's always the terrorist methodology. But they've got this unbelievable high-tech valley where they're just bumping out all kinds of things, high technology that's being grabbed by the rest of the world because Israel is advancing in this area. Why do I think this is happening? I concur hardly with your opinion. He'll bless those who bless them, curse those who curse them, and he's making sure that God's people are provided for. So if they don't get the mineral rights from the oil, they get the technology benefits And by the way, they're also doing great advances in medicine as well. Interesting to hear Netanyahu not talk about security, but just simply talk about the economy. Double-digit positive direction economic growth in Israel, off the charts. And when you realize that Israel has been able to have such a booming economy, not only is it smart business, but I think it's God's blessing as well. And, in fact, you can go to YouTube and Google and just watch a whole bunch of YouTube videos that explain some of the economic growth that Israel has had. So God is providing and protecting regardless of what the rest of the world wants to do, and I don't think that's by happenstance.
No. So Janet, if Tim Wildman asks why I'm on YouTube for the rest of the afternoon, I can just tell him that you said we could go to YouTube and watch these videos.
As long as you're not watching the greatest commercial bloopers of 2012, then
right.
It's okay.
Okay. Hey, it's what's interesting is as you and Fred were talking about the blessing to Israel in terms of natural resources and the technology. I was thinking again about what you were just saying about these explosions in West Tehran. The ability of Israel to develop technology to protect itself. Now, of course, they have relied on in the past the sale of fighter jets and what have you from the United States. But Israel, I guess, because of the way they came into existence and the fact that they've had to fight for every breath, so to speak, as a newborn nation and on as history has progressed for them. They have to fight to survive. So they don't sit back and rely on somebody else to protect them, thinking about the Iron Dome. And,
yes.
and I know some of that technology is probably Patriot missile systems and so on and so forth, but they're developing their own technology. I was thinking about the, the Stuxnet worm that
yes.
it struck the facilities in Iran. And, of course, nobody knows who that was. But I look at those kinds of things, and I think Israel is also developing the technology to defend itself because, as we have seen since 2008, they're not so sure where this administration stands, although I think most of us know that they don't have a friend in this administration, not like past presidents. So this impulse to protect themselves as well as provide financially for themselves is kind of a part of the DNA of Israel, because that's what they've had to do to survive.
Absolutely. And I don't think they should be criticized for that. I think they should be commended. It is, by the way, it's a biblical right for self-defense and national defense. That's very much an inherently biblical principle. But let me go back to what you said before about the technology. I remember having a conversation with a senior official with the Israeli Defense Forces, and I was trying to ask him about some of the technology that they might use, and of course he was very wily in his response. But what he basically intimated to me was the technology is there for them, if necessary, not to even have to fire a shot. They could probably take down the nuclear reactors in Iran just by putting some computer worm in there, and as you rightly said before, they didn't, quote, take credit for what happened in the past, and I think it's to their credit they didn't take credit, but they can disassemble with the technology that they've got. Let me tell you something else. For our friends tilt against Israel, has to do any kind of an airstrike. What they do is they actually have grids, and they look for antiquities, they look for highest density of population, and they go out of their way to make sure that they minimize, if not completely eliminate, collateral damage. And I give you the second airstrike in Damascus over the weekend. They did it in the middle of the night at this factory when they knew that people would not be working in the factory at night. That wasn't by happenstance. They do that because they're extremely careful. They're not trying to raise the hackles on the neck of their neighbors by any stretch of the imagination. So with great precision, they make sure that antiquities are protected and human life is spared whenever possible. And so I give you that strike as another example of them thinking through carefully how to minimize collateral damage. But that doesn't mean that Israel is going to just roll over and play dead. I often wonder, by the way, if Israel were to ever go to a full-blown war against Syria, against Lebanon, whatever, who would come to her rescue? That's the part that bothers me the most. Now, I know that God will always come to her rescue, but I wonder what we, the United States, would do. You know, when we watched what was happening with North Korea, we were sending ships out from Guam, and I'm thinking that's good. But if Israel were ever to get involved actively, what conversations took place behind closed doors between our president and Israel's prime minister saying we pledge our support, not just on the campaign trail, not just as a stomp speech, but I mean hard material support. What would we do to come to Israel's defense? And there's a reason for us to continue to pray for those in authority, because that's where the real metals testing is going to take place. Will we not just talk the talk, but will we walk the walk? And should Israel our defense, and I know that she's got the best troops in the world, but should she need our defense, would we show up? And that question is still pending.
Janet, let's stay in that part of the world, but move a little further west. Benghazi is back in the news in Washington, and the original story that the nation was told about what happened in Benghazi with the death of our ambassador there and 3 others had to do with a DVD mocking Mohammed. More and more we are learning that was an outright lie told by that administration and peddled around by Susan Rice. The so-called whistleblowers are testifying. I think there's a hearing with Darrell Issa tomorrow in the House on this, where we're going to hear more details. But right from the beginning, it was an orchestrated effort to mislead the American people. That's the way it seems right now, by all the way up to Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State at the time.
Absolutely. I am so thankful that you brought this up. You know, I want to wish well of my government. You know, when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, the people groan. But I also don't like living under a shadow. And I think what we saw in this particular incident, it's because, A, we refused to identify the enemy as the enemy. But really, is it rocket science to know that we need to be at high alert at every base in the world, every embassy in the world on 9/11? The terrorists are real big on symbolism, and they also have patience, and they can wait a long time. So we've just seen an upheaval in Libya, a dictator deposed. We saw his body dragged through the streets again, and not unlike Egypt, by the way, another vacuum has been created. And why do I think Mr. Nice Guy is not going to take his place? So we'll see more unrest there. And so it's 9/11, and now we get all of the problem being relegated to a video that was, a trailer seen by less than 500 people, and it wasn't even posted by the time they had this attack. Just the facts are just absolutely ridiculous in this particular case. But the bigger problem are the whistleblowers who we now believe have been told that they were being threatened. I know Victoria Tunzing. She is a marvelous woman. I've done a whole lot of television with her. She has a backbone made out of steel, she is a woman who now has earned a reputation as a former federal prosecutor of protecting whistleblowers. She has gone on national television again and again and again, and I'm sure that she's giving certain people in the administration a headache this big by saying, we asked for a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act information. It's not forthcoming. We're told to call numbers that don't exist. We're hearing testimony of people who are saying that they're being told that their careers are going to be threatened if they don't respond. And now we're starting to see individuals step forward like Gregory Hicks, a U.S. diplomat who apparently is now starting to speak. And I would say for anyone who can, you keep an eye on the hearings tomorrow. It will be chilling, and if I might be so bold, indicting testimony when we begin to realize that a blind eye and a deaf ear was turned. As a result of that, 4 Americans lost their lives, and we proved that we were not on the ready as we should have been on September 11th. So when it's all said and done, now your Secretary of State, who was on the watch at the time, has retired. She's getting ready to do another run for the White House. So who will bear the brunt of this? Who will pay the price for this? You can't put the new Secretary of State in the crosshair. John Kerry didn't have the job at the time. So I think that was a brilliant piece of chess for them to move her out, move him in. She's now a private citizen. For her to be called back again, she'd have to be subpoenaed. Would she respond? Maybe yes, maybe no. But in the end, who will pay the price for this? There'll be some finger-wagging and tongue-clucking, but who will pay the price? And a price should be paid for the death of 4 Americans. That's going to be the problem. And not only that, there's a bigger issue. America's trust has been eroded again. Americans who are already suspicious of their government will be all the more suspicious because a cover-up will be exposed. And when the disinfectant of sunlight is applied to government, we see all kinds of changes, and tomorrow will be extremely important.
Janet, I'm going to do something that's going to be very difficult for you. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to respond to my next question, okay? From what you know about what's coming in this hearing, what do you think the political fallout is going to be for Hillary Clinton and President Obama? You think this is going to go anywhere?
What a great question. And let me go to Hillary first. No, and that's because, unfortunately, Americans have very, very short memories. If she runs, remember her run would be 2016. Some people would try to bring it up, but in the meantime, they would point to her track record as Secretary of State. There'll be books and documentaries and movies that will come out, and it will absolutely remove any besmirching of her character. And unfortunately, she won't be held accountable. So I don't think it'll be any threat at all to her. To President Obama, unfortunately, this is what we call a lame duck, which means he's already got the office, he's not running again, and his attitude would be, and you would like me to do what? So unfortunately, it'll be swept under the carpet.